Hey y'all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at BALMUDA The Toaster. This is a Japanese design-based brand, and this claims to be one of the best toasters in the world, using a steam technology to ensure the bread that comes out is going to be moist on the inside, really fluffy, but also crisp on the outside. So it promises to say goodbye to bread that becomes really tough and hard after you use a normal toaster or toaster oven, and it can also reheat foods including pizzas as well as even croissants, replicating the texture and taste when it was first freshly made and first taken out of an oven. So you can pick between several different colors, whether it's more traditional shades of black and white or more quirky colors including gray and this slightly more brownish shade. So this is actually not brand new to the market. In fact, BALMUDA first debuted their steam-based toaster in 2015 for commercial kitchens, but it became so popular, especially in Japan, that the consumer version came out, and the spring 2017 revision is basically the one that's still being sold on shelves there, although the US model that we have over here came out in 2020. It still operates and looks almost identical, with a couple of small differences I will touch on later on in this video. I'll also briefly mention that this brand, again BALMUDA, does also make other products, including a kind of ill-fated but very cute small Android smartphone. It actually reminds me of a Palm Pre from back in the day, but with more modern components, again with design being at the forefront, as well as their speakers that have this glowing LED component, giving it kind of a retro vibe. So they are quickly becoming a fairly well-known international design brand with a lot of these, again, smart home type products. And coming back to the toaster, by the way, this has also won an IF Design Award in terms of its aesthetics, and in terms of temperature control, it reaches up to 450 degrees. The internal dimensions are 10.7 inches by 8 inches by 7 inches, so it fits approximately 2 slices of bread when you are popping it in. Now, pricing-wise, because it is a design-based brand, BALMUDA does typically charge a bit of a premium, and this definitely isn't the cheapest toaster on the market. The MRSP of $300, especially when it first came out in 2015, was often ridiculed for being too high and expensive for just a toaster. But these days, because it's a model that has been out for quite a while, you can often find some discounts floating around. For example, on Amazon, there can occasionally be 20% off discounts, which puts the cost closer to around $240 and under. And so at sub $250, it's actually not bad anymore, especially with inflation, and considering that other more generic brands typically charge for not too far off these days. Point being that when put into context, the price doesn't seem as bad as it once did. Inside of the cardboard box, we have just a note that says, "Hello, kitchen," and it says, "Thank you for purchasing BALMUDA the Toaster. We hope you enjoy the exciting options this product brings to everyday dining." And then up top, we have just a quick user guide along with a tray that you can use to, again, bake the bread on top of, as well as a super cute, tiny little cup, which can add up to 5 cc of water, the amount that you need to moisten up the bread if you're using it with that steam mode. And even though it is made out of plastic, it is just extremely cute in how they provide this tiny little accessory with it. And just like the name, calling it the toaster in such a definitive way is definitely very playful. And by the way, this is the full instruction guide, as well as a quick user manual printed in color that also shows you some recipes. And aside from sandwich breads, you can also reheat artisan breads, including French loaves, to make it moist and fresh again, even if it's running a little bit stale and getting hard. This will bring back the life. So the pizza mode will also work with bagels, for example, and other types of breads that have toppings on top that you can melt using this particular mode. Cutting the bread in slightly different angles and methods, whether straight down or sliced sideways, can also make the texture more or less crispy, and you can play around with those modes as you would desire. The regular oven mode, by the way, though, doesn't require you to add any water. This just operates like a typical oven, and here you can bake objects including cookies, as well as other maybe frozen foods as well. Here's also a checklist if you're wondering what types of breads require X amount of time. You can reference it here. For example, English muffins versus bagels versus baguettes, hot dog buns, so on and so forth. And you can also experiment again with other recipes that they have available on their website as well for additional inspiration. Here's an apple and cheese toast as an example of some other tasty breads and toasts that you can make inside of this machine. And first impressions of the toaster itself, aside from looking very clean, is it's a bit smaller and more lightweight than I expected, only around 10 pounds. So it feels almost like nothing as you're lifting it around. Here's a more typical toaster oven that is slightly more generic, side by side with this particular model, which you can tell is just a bit more shallow in terms of its depth. Not to mention that some additional space is technically being occupied by the steam technology component. And so again, the actual capacity is really designed for at most kind of 2 pieces of bread. That being said, the design is just super aesthetic, and technically it takes up a little bit less counter space as a result if you're fitting into a more narrow space or apartment, for example, and just again looks really cute in its almost vintage retro way. I also appreciate that on the very top of the toaster you'll find some of the additional quick instructions, including if you're using regular sandwich bread versus pizza versus pastry, and the minutes that it takes to cook and reheat those types of foods, so you don't have to always reference the user manual. Now, in terms of the build quality, it is crafted out of aluminum, like most toaster ovens, although it does have a slightly more interesting texture to it, which is slightly easier to tell if you zoom in all the way, and overall, again, just looks quite clean. And as for what's the best color, this will obviously vary from person to person based on preferences, but also keep in mind the type of background or kitchen that you have. For example, if you are in a slightly darker space, then also picking up a black color toaster might make it blend a little bit more seamlessly into the background, versus a white color might just jump out a little bit more. So it depends on if you want it to stand out or kind of blend in, but I think the gray one is a pretty good in-between shade. Some accents here on the window also accentuates that glass panel that you can use to look inside when it's cooking, and there are 2 glass tubes on the top as well as on the bottom for heating things up. Now, by the way, on the inside there's also additional baking tray, so this can be helpful if you are, for example, heating pizza or other objects that may droop and melt down and you want to prevent that from happening. You can use this tray instead. It has another BALMUDA logo on the side, and it's non-stick as well. And here's a peek at the inside of the toaster, which you can tell has kind of an interesting curved mechanism to the way that the door here technically closes up, sliding in and out with a pretty smooth overall action. But again, not the largest capacity in the world, but still is good enough for things like bread and reheating slices of pizza, maybe 1 or 2 at a time. Now on the very top here, we have another metal compartment where you pour in the water for the steam technology to function, and there's also a little cover there that will close it up when not in use. This is technically the pipe where the water that gets poured in will flow down into the bottom section, which is the boiling plate. And it can actually remove this eco boiler made out of, again, metal, and you can tell that underneath here, this is the section that's going to get really hot and then evaporate the water into steam as it's cooking. So it's a pretty clever overall mechanism, quite simple, but overall still does its job. And another thoughtful design element is there is a removable tray at the very bottom that you can pull out to throw out any crumbs that accumulate and fall down over time, making it quite easy to clean. Otherwise, we have just a knob that you can use to dial between the various bread modes as well as the temperature modes, although you can't really adjust it flexibly in between. For instance, if you want to cook at, say, 425 degrees, that's kind of out of luck. You either have to go to 400 or 450 using these manual controls. Especially as kind of a high-tech toaster, maybe there can be an app component using your smartphone where you're able to adjust the temperature more flexibly in between. That could be nice to see, but it is what it is. On the side here, you can also control the, again, duration that you want to be toasting from 0 all the way up to 15 minutes maximum. So again, if there was a smartphone app in the future, they could potentially allow you to customize the time even more flexibly, longer than 15 minutes or in between 15 and 10 minutes, since right now it kind of jumps from 10 minutes to 15 minutes maximum. There's no additional setting there in between, although from 0 to 10 minutes you have increments of 1 minute each, and further between 0 and 5 minutes you can also go into half-minute intervals as well. Now all the buttons here do feel pretty tactile and, again, clicky. They are mechanical keys, although they are made out of plastic on the knobs here as opposed to, say, metal. What I do like, though, is some of the accent work on the sides, as well as some of these bumps and grooves. So if you're sliding into a more tight spot, it at least leaves a little bit of space for extra ventilation for it to pass through and cool down. And here's also a peek of what the toaster looks like on the very back. So there's a slight bump, but like most home kitchen appliances, the adapter cord here is not user removable. It is soldered on in. And when you're ready to cook, just tap on the power key. There are these pretty soft and soothing orange lights that will show you an indication of what mode you're on, as well as when you're sliding between the different dials, there's this soft click sound, so there is a speaker built on in to simulate that mechanical feel. So let's say we want to cook some of these rolls. I'm going to now cook it for, let's say, 3 minutes, and it will start there accordingly. And now the steaming is in action. You can see the window there start to fog up accordingly. It's actually really fun to just stare and watch the toaster through the window here. Now, I've actually been using the BALMUDA toaster for about 30 days or a month prior to making this particular video. The gray model here was a new one that I unboxed to better illustrate the overall experience, but I've been using a white version already for a longer period of time. So let's actually run through a quick montage of some of the types of breads that I've cooked and experimented with now. I had a very tasty time testing out the BALMUDA toaster. Overall, I have to say that the croissant as well as some of the just regular sandwich breads were perhaps the most satisfying because you got that actual crunch of something hard on the very outside, but also super moist and fluffy on the inside. It's a pretty amazing texture as if it came fresh out of a bakery, and that is just how good it is, despite it being store-bought bread or in some cases frozen bread that was getting a little bit stale, but using this machine made it feel like it was fresh. Once again, the texture and taste was very good. And same thing goes with pizza. You get the nice crispy texture back again, which is very satisfying. That being said, because of the, again, slightly more limited overall volume inside, I have found that any breads or sandwiches that you're trying to bake that is higher than, say, 1 inch does tend to burn a little bit more quickly on the top because it's too close to the top tube, which is the heating component. So that does mean that you are a little bit limited by that capacity, and so ideally you'll be cooking slightly more thinner breads and objects inside. It may seem like at first some of the breads might be a little bit overly toasted, slightly browning on the edges, but that is in fact purposeful and at least matches pretty much par on par with the images they provided inside of the book. So what you see here is pretty much exactly what you get in reality. It's a little bit extra crispy on the outside, but amazingly enough, the inside is still soft. That being said, you're definitely paying just a little bit of a premium for that design touch of that integrated kind of tube and heating plate. In some cases, you are able to just, for example, place a cup of water inside of your toaster oven and cook at the same time. That can perhaps simulate a similar experience, but this just disperses the steam maybe a little bit more evenly. That can be a more value-oriented hack, so to speak, but it's just not as elegant as a design like this. So whether it's necessarily worth it over a regular toaster or regular toaster oven is going to be up to personal preference. For me, at the very least, I've been satisfied and overall quite impressed with the taste and texture that's been able to reproduce. I will also say that a toaster oven in general is, again, very versatile. So it's kind of a alternative to an air fryer in many cases, where you can cook many types of foods inside, especially in some of the normal cooking modes without putting in any water, which even if you're new to cooking or if you're tight on space, you don't have a lot of appliances inside of your kitchen or room, can still be a great idea to consider. That is to say, again, as an appliance category, I do think these toaster ovens are pretty convenient. And for bread, at least, that you're reheating, it's a pretty fast process because in most cases with sandwich bread, it only takes about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes to toast 2 pieces, so you don't have to be waiting too long here at all. And ending this on 2 final notes. The first being that if you're not buying this directly from BALMUDA on Amazon, you can also try third-party sellers on eBay, but be careful because a lot of the listings on eBay are actually for the Japanese version that are getting shipped and imported from Japan. It's a slightly different SKU, and if you look really closely closely, they're actually using Celsius. And when converted, the Japanese model actually is about 3 to 4 degrees lower on each of the settings compared to the US model that can reach a slightly higher temperature. Also, the dials on the side, if we look really closely on this example image, for the Japanese model, you actually get a topping with a piece of butter there on the very top, as compared to the US model here instead has a pizza mode. Technically, I think it's doing the same thing, but they're just drawing the logo there a little bit differently because of the assumption that folks here in North America enjoy pizzas more. Otherwise, the design and capacity are going to be quite similar. Except for one instance. In the Japanese market, there is a exclusive BALMUDA The Toaster Pro model that is unfortunately not yet available on their international and US market variants. So the slightly more upgraded model has just a little bit more additional metal accents going on, including the handle here, as opposed to being made out of more of a polycarbonate texture. And perhaps more importantly, there is one extra mode that is called Salamander. Sounds kind of weird at first, but essentially it applies a blast of heat, which is the maximum temperature that the toaster can reach for a very short duration of time, around 10 to 15 seconds, to make the outside texture extra crispy without burning the inside. So if you want extra crispiness, that is one extra mode you'll find on the Pro model of the toaster. That being said, everything else is exactly the same, and like I mentioned, the normal bread as well as the kind of Artisan bread modes already do get quite crispy by default. In fact, you get some browning already. So I don't think it's necessarily a must-have feature because it already is getting a crisp enough texture as it is without over burning the bread, that is, unless you're trying to experiment yourself and only using it for, a custom mode of say 1 minute and then you want to use the salamander mode on top of that. But if you're using one of the default modes, I honestly don't feel like it's perhaps a must-have function. But overall, the aesthetics of the Pro model just do look a little bit more fancy and premium. So there we have it. The regular BALMUDA the Toaster, even now in 2024, still is a very well-performing and, again, a fairly premium, tasty bread-making toaster that you can also use for other food objects as well. You can check out more details if interested in the links down below. For now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews, a pretty cool toaster oven from a very cool Japanese brand that has been BALMUDA the Toaster.